Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Joni Johnston. I want to thank you so much for your patience over the past few months while I've been missing in action. I have been working on a few things. One that I'm super proud about is a new book that's called Serial Killers 101 Questions True Crime Fans Ask. And the idea for this book came about from my Psychology Today blog and all the readers that have so many good suggestions and good ideas. So I'm really excited about that. The case we're going to be covering today involves the death of 24-year-old Meg Burke. So here's what happened. On March the 19th, 1985, 22-year-old Scott Purk called 911. This is in Akron, Ohio. And he told dispatchers that his wife had just hung herself. He said that they had been arguing that morning. There was a lot of emotions, a lot of fighting, a lot of fussing. And that at some point he went to the bathroom to take a bath. He said he needed to cool off, which apparently that was literally and figuratively. And while he was in the bath, he saw her walk past. He didn't think that much of it. But when he got out, he found her hanging from their second-story banister. She even still had the rope that was around her neck when police arrived. Scott is stunned. He says he cut her down immediately. He called EMS and he started doing CPR. This is an absolutely horrible situation to begin with. To think about somebody that you've been married, I think been married for maybe 3 years, having this kind of ending to their relationship. But what made it even worse was that Meg was 8.5 months pregnant. So while medical personnel are trying to save Meg, they are also trying to save their unborn son, who they've already named David Christopher. So the ambulance whisked away Meg and the baby. And meanwhile, police are trying to figure out what in the heck happened. Why would a woman who was about to give birth kill herself and her unborn son? They just can't get their head around this. So they began talking and asking Scott a lot of different questions. And so what he says is that Meg just had not been feeling well. She hadn't been feeling well that day. She hadn't been feeling well for the past couple of weeks. And in fact, he says he was so worried about her that he made an appointment the same day that she died to just get checked out. Not only has she been not feeling very well physically, but she seemed to really be somewhat depressed. Scott also mentions that this depression was something that Meg has had to live with for a long period of time. So Scott also says that Meg really has seemed depressed over the past few weeks, and that really, in fact, this was nothing new, that Meg was somebody who had a pretty long-standing history of depression and that she had, in fact, had attempted suicide in the past. He also mentioned that he had seen a suicide note right before he called 911. Now, when the police are talking to Scott, they're all looking for this note and they can't find this note. But Scott says, look at this. And he pulls out these poems that Meg has apparently written. And they're pretty dark, they're pretty grim. And one even ended with and then she killed herself. So that sure seemed like a suicide note to police officers. No, it wasn't cut and dried, but it was certainly a very dark and pretty depressing thing to be talking about. Now, in spite of their best efforts, the nurses and the doctors, Meg and her unborn child didn't make it. Neither one of them made it. And again, her family was absolutely devastated. They could not believe that Meg would do anything to hurt herself, but especially, again, her unborn baby. The only thing Meg had ever wanted to be, according to everybody in her life, was to be a mom. And so this just absolutely stunned everybody involved. Yes, they said it's true. Meg had these normal labor and delivery jitters. Yes, she'd been tired the past couple of days and been out of sorts. But what woman who is about to pop doesn't feel tired and worn out? But everybody said she was excited about this baby. She was over the moon. Her parents even found a letter that she had written to her grandmother the day before she died. that was talking about how excited that she was. And this letter was to her grandmother and was just really an endearing letter saying, "Hey, can you believe that I'm going to be a mom and you're going to be a great grandmother? Isn't that so exciting? I can hardly believe it. And I promise as soon as I can, I'm going to come visit you and show you the baby, et cetera, et cetera." This was going to be her first great grandchild. I really can't exaggerate just how upsetting and devastating this was to everybody involved. So, who was this young woman? Before we talk about what happened next, I want to talk a little bit about Meg. She lost her life so young, and it's because we all know that sometimes when we're talking about true crime, the victim gets lost in the story. And we end up focusing on the perpetrator or the who done it or why done it, but not who did it happen to. So let's talk about Meg. So Meg was born Margaret Ann Metcalf on November 15th, 1960. She was born in Rochester, New York, and her family moved to Akron when she was about 5 years old. She was an insurance claims adjuster. She was a member of the Holy Family Parish, and she had one brother, Michael, who was 2 years younger than she is. Personality-wise and hobby-wise and everything, Meg loved music. Her whole family said. Michael, her brother, said that they had pretty normal brother and sister relationship. They argued like all siblings do, and yet they had a lot of fun together. And he said, Meg was really pretty easygoing as a kid. She was pretty happy doing just about anything, that she loved to travel, and she and the family would travel some. She took piano lessons. She seemed to everybody pretty much at the time. There just weren't really any significant problems that she had growing up. Her best friend at the time that she died had gone to high school with Meg. Her name was Dawn. And she described Meg kind of as this quiet, free spirit, a Janis Joplin kind of person. Again, a serious student, but also this cool, laid back bohemian vibe. And one of the things that she said about Meg was that she just exuded this kind of quiet confidence that people would come into a room and just want to be with her. When she became a teenager, she got to be a teenager, Meg really got into writing. She started writing short stories and some music, but especially poems. And she was really good at writing these poems. I mean, how hard is it to write poems and to get some published? She actually got some of her poems published. And this is somebody who's a very talented and pretty serious student. The people who were the closest to Meg at this time as a teenager also said that Meg did go through a period of time that was just somewhat dark, and that some of her poems were about sadness, about loss, and even a few of them were about death. There was an incident that happened one time when Meg was a teenager where she had gone to a friend's house and she had locked herself in a bathroom, and she had said that she was going to slit her wrist. And nobody kind of knew really what triggered this, but she stayed in there for a while. She came out, she didn't hurt herself. And she seemed to move past that. She hadn't cut herself at all when she came out or anything like that. Dawn, her best friend from high school, also related another somewhat similar story. She said that after high school, she and Meg had lived together. And that one time after high school, when she and Meg were sharing an apartment, she came home and the blinds in the apartment had fallen down and on the floor. And that Dawn kind of remembers that there was this note on the coffee table that Meg had written. And on this note, she had said that she had tried to hang herself using the cord from the mini blinds, but it broke, and she never did anything else about that. So again, there were obviously some hard things going on in Meg's life around this time. She had made this comment that she felt like a burden sometimes to her family, even though her family insisted they never felt anything like that, and they really couldn't figure out why that was the case. But again, she went through this period that was a dark time. But here is the thing. Yes, again, Meg's family said Meg had gone through a period of depression, and she had even made suicide gestures at the very least a couple of times, but that was years ago. She was happy now. Again, she was over the moon when she found out she was pregnant. She was happy in her marriage. Again, this was water under the bridge. Her family said, we don't know what happened to Meg, but it was not suicide. Now, interestingly enough, Michael, her brother, says he thought from the very beginning that Scott had something to do with it. One of the kind of interesting things about this is that nobody seems to have liked Scott, but nobody seems to be able to explain why. So her family really never warmed up to Scott. As a matter of fact, when Meg and Scott got married, nobody in her family came to the wedding. But when you try to ask them, what was it? They all just say, I don't know. We just didn't like him at all. And Michael even said in the very beginning, my first thought was, what did you do to her? One of the things about this case that really hits me hard is that I know how difficult it is for families who've lost somebody to suicide. It is just agony that many surviving family members go through. There's all this guilt, second guessing, I should have seen something. There's all this grief. And on top of that, the topic of suicide isn't as taboo as it used to be. There's still a stigma associated with it. So I could only imagine what it'd be like to be in Meg's family situation where you're being told that your daughter or your sister committed suicide and you have to go through that and navigate all of that. And even worse, you have all these very, very serious questions about whether it actually was suicide. I cannot even imagine that. So they're talking to the police and they're telling them, we don't think our daughter did that. And the police also, I think, have their suspicions about Scott, but they don't really know what to do with it. Maybe here's the note that Scott showed them. There's no outward evidence of foul play. And then the autopsy results come in. And the medical examiner at the time rules it a suicide and makes comments about her having this history of suicide in the past and that she had some serious emotional problems. And so here is this family who's pretty much convinced that something else happened to Meg, but their hands are pretty much tied. And I think the police at that point felt like their hands were also pretty much tied. So the death is ruled a suicide and the case is eventually closed. And life went on. It would be 24 years before Meg's family would learn the truth of what happened to Meg. And it had nothing to do with suicide. So let's fast forward now to this freezing night in Stowe, Ohio, which is pretty close to Akron, to March of 2009. Dispatch gets a call about a house fire. And the caller is a 16-year-old girl, and she tells them her parents and she and her younger brother have barely escaped from this blazing fire that is now consuming their house. So the firefighters, of course, race to the house. And when they get to the scene, the first thing they notice is they are just overwhelmed with the smell of gasoline, which I'm not a firefighter, but I think that would be suspicious if all of a sudden you come to a fire and you're overwhelmed with gasoline. They immediately suspect arson, and so they call the police. Now, police come out and they find the family huddled over together at a neighbor's house, and they ask the father to come over and to talk to them about what happened, because number one, their house is completely demolished. Number two, it's clearly suspicious. And so the father, whose name is Scott Purk, tells them, yeah, we were all asleep and I heard this big explosion and I got up and luckily I heard it and I got everybody out of the house and thank God I was able to rescue them. And so of course the police go, is there anybody who want to hurt you? And Scott goes, no, I can't think of anybody who want to hurt us. We don't have any enemies or anything like that. And he begins to tell them a bunch of different things. He said that he and his wife were swingers, that his wife had been out earlier that night with another man. It was completely consensual on everybody's part. She had come home and brought him some leftover food, which he had eaten. She had gone to bed first. Then he had gone, and then he woke up to this loud boom and got the family out. The police were just stunned by this story, but they're listening. And they end up listening and listening because as he's sitting in the car with this police officer, he begins to just open up and say things and talk about things that were very surprising, to say the least. So, for example, he just volunteers out of thin air that he had lost his job like 8 or 9 days before the fire happened. He also mentions to them that he's in a lot of debt and that the insurance money from this fire is really going to help him out. It's going to reduce his debt significantly. He also mentions that he had happened to videotape everything in their house a day or two before the house fire, just in case they ever had a fire. Can you even imagine what it would be like to be that police officer listening? You're thinking, am I hearing all this? Is this for real? This guy could not look any more guilty if he had, come out of the house with a lit torch and a can of gasoline. Is this person telling me all these things? He just couldn't imagine. And then things became even stranger, if you can believe that. Scott just, I don't know if it was the warm car or what it was, but he just could not quit talking. He then mentions just out of the blue that his wife had committed suicide years earlier when she was 9 months pregnant with their child. Again, I don't know the context of this, if it was that he was trying to show the police officers, look what a bad life I've had or what bad luck, but he mentions this. And then he tells the police officer that he was so consumed with grief over his wife's death that he became a burglar. I'm sorry to laugh about that. I'm just, we've all dealt with grief at certain points in our life. And he's the first person I've ever heard of his grief propelled him into a life of crime. About a year after Meg's death, he served a 7-year sentence for a series of burglaries for which he became known as the ninja burglar. So he would dress up like a ninja. He would sneak into his victim's bedroom at night. He would watch this person sleep, which is just the creepiest thing ever. And then he would sometimes steal things, a wallet or a purse, and sometimes other valuables. And he burglarized like 9 or 10 homes and businesses in this kind of short period of time. I think it was like a month that he did this. And of course, he ended up getting caught. He would dress in these dark clothes and he would bring, what are those things called, like stars, ninja stars? Anyway, ninja gear with him. He would sometimes target single women, and sometimes he would take a pair of underwear with him as a trophy. And I think sometimes he carried nunchucks with him. You get where I'm going with all this. This is not a normal grief reaction to losing your spouse. He had been arrested for these burglaries after he was spotted, I think, driving a stolen car, and he ended up doing some time for this. And he had, gotten out of jail, got in prison, and got married, et cetera, et cetera. So the detective is sitting there listening to all this, thinking, okay, I'm already thinking I'm listening to an arsonist. Could I be listening to a murderer also? What is this guy telling me? And so, to this police officer's credit, when he meets with the fire marshal, they decide to pursue 2 parallel investigations. It was pretty difficult, as you can imagine, to investigate a 24-year-old murder. So another thing I forgot to mention, because I got so carried away with the ninja burglar aspect of the story, is not only was he talking about the benefits of this arson for him personally, or this fire for him, when they were starting to investigate this fire the night that it happened, the police looked in his car and they found that his car was filled with household objects. And Scott explained that the reason that his car was packed was because they were getting ready to go visit family members that day. But one of the things that a police officer noticed was that there were things like photo albums, there were cookbooks, recipe books with family recipes in there. These are not the typical things that you would think you would be packing up to take to grandmother's house. They're more like the kinds of things that you might pack in your car if you knew the house was going to be torched and you didn't want to lose those in the fire. So getting back to the murder investigation, again, had some hurdles. Not only was it, 24 years had passed, but there were different jurisdictions involved. And I know that it can be very sensitive to, if you're one police department, to go to another police department and go, hey, what about this case 24 years ago? Are you sure you got it right? But this detective does. He goes and contacts the Akron Police Department. And again, to his credit, and Akron Police Department, they go, hey, it's a closed case. It's not a cold case. And if you want to take a look at it, then I'll send you over what we have. And so you have the parallel arson investigation that's going on. And now you have this police officer in Stowe who is determined to look and see, is this guy a murderer? Is this guy toying with me? Is he telling me this stuff because he's daring me to catch him. So the Stowe police began working with the Akron Police Department. When they got a copy of the autopsy photos, a couple of things really struck the Stowe Police Department. Number one is the autopsy photos in his mind did not look like a suicide. The marks on Meg's neck didn't look anything like a rope. It really looked like it was a belt that had been around her neck. And also the way that the marks on the neck, they were horizontal. And if she was hanging, you would think that it would be more like this. They also began digging into Scott's behavior after the murder. They learned that he had moved in with another woman really soon after his wife died. So they decided to give his ex-girlfriend a call. And when they talked to her, not only did she have nothing good to say about Scott, she described him as this kind of crazy, evil person. She actually told them that he had at one point confessed to her that he had murdered Meg. So you can imagine that this is completely piquing the interest of the murder investigators, who decide, after a lot of talk and a lot of thinking, they decide that we are really going to have to exhume Meg's body. If we really have a chance at convicting this person, we're going to have to do that. And that's very sensitive because they're going to have to go to her family and ask for permission. And for some families, this is a very difficult thing. But they go to her family and they say, look, we are suspicious that Scott Purk murdered your daughter, and we would like to do this. And they were 100% on board. They said, we never, ever thought that Meg killed herself, and they agreed to do that. So they're in the process now of getting an order to exhume this body. While this is happening and the arson investigation is continuing, another arson happens a block away from where Scott Purk used to live. It's now March of 2010, and Scott and his family is living across town now. But what is amazing is that this fire looks identical to the fire that happened at Scott Purk's house. And police are immediately suspicious. There's gasoline all over the place. The gas meter cap has been taken off. So they go straight to Scott's house. And what they find is incredibly incriminating. His car is still warm. It's a freezing night in March. And there are old boots right by the door. And they find some gas cans right inside the door. And so they think that Scott did this other arson, which actually could have really hurt somebody. The person who lived there just happened to not be home. It backfired. So this investigation's heating up. They go and they exhume Meg's body. And fortunately, it was amazingly well preserved. They are actually able to still see the marks around her neck. And the new medical examiner, of course, it's 24 years later, there's better technology, better trained medical examiners, essentially looks at this and says, no, I do not think, number one, that these marks were made by a rope. They tried all different ways to see if they could duplicate that with a rope, and they could never make that happen, but it definitely looked like a belt. The medical examiner also thought that, again, the way the marks were made seemed more consistent with strangulation than when somebody had been hanging. So it's September of 21st of 2011, which is when her body's exhumed. And this really does turn the way this investigation is going. Not only does the medical examiner have this different opinion, but he also notices a bruise on her back still. And he hypothesized that it's where Scott put his knee potentially on her back so he could strangle her. So he must have put the rope or the belt over her and then tightened it. And that's really what, and then the knee was to hold her down. So they theorized that he did this, and then he actually put a rope around her and then hung her over the banister. They also did some experiments to see what would happen to the banister if it held a body that was Meg's shape and size at the time that she was pregnant. So they built this mannequin and actually went to the apartment where the original banister was still there, which is pretty amazing. And it was questionable whether it would even hold that much weight, but if it did, it would make a lot of marks in this wood. This is obviously very damning evidence. So they first arrest Scott for 2 counts of arson. And while he is in prison and he's subsequently convicted on these arson charges, he ends up pleading guilty because there's so much evidence against him. In November of 2015, he goes on trial for the murder of Meg Purk. The evidence was circumstantial, but the police really did a good job of putting together this timeline and putting together all of the evidence that suggested that this was strangulation and this was not suicide. The defense tried all kinds of things and said that, hey, we're second guessing the police, we're second guessing the medical examiner from 24 years ago, which was true. But I think the evidence was pretty compelling. And the jury 100% was convinced that Scott Purk had murdered his wife, Meg, in March of 1985. And so even though it was delayed, justice was eventually served to him. So he is currently serving time in Ohio in a prison. His first parole hearing will be in 2050 when he is 91 years old. Now, I want to talk just for a minute about this idea of staged suicides, because sometimes I get phone calls from family members and they are convinced that their loved one did not kill him or herself. And that would just be a terrible place to be. And sometimes I think that it's true that the person may not have committed suicide. One of the things that we can do in that situation as forensic psychologists is something called a psychological autopsy. And a psychological autopsy is kind of like the parallel to a physical autopsy. In a physical autopsy, you are really taking the body apart in a way and looking at all the different organs and trying to figure out the puzzle and the answers to why this person died. And in a psychological autopsy, we're doing the same thing, but we're looking at that person's mind. And so some of the things that I do, for example, is I create a timeline of that person's last few weeks. I look for any evidence of that person's behavior or what they said or what they did. Are there any indications of suicide? I look at all what the research says in terms of what does the research say in terms of risk factors for suicide? Did this person have those risk factors? I talk to friends, I talk to family members, sometimes I talk to coworkers, just get that person's perspective. I look at medical records, I look at diaries, social media, because again, I'm trying to answer the question is, why did this person die? And if it was suicide, then what caused this person to commit suicide? What was the timeline? Psychological autopsy is an interesting thing to do. Now, it's important to realize a couple of things, that some things that we might think don't indicate suicide sometimes have nothing to do with it. So, for example, sometimes somebody will call me up and say, I know that my blank didn't commit suicide because they didn't leave a suicide note. And as hard as it is to believe, because I think we all want to have some answers and we want that person to tell us, why did you do this? Most people don't leave a suicide note. And so just because a person did not leave a suicide note does not mean that that person didn't kill themselves. Also, just because that person doesn't have a history of depression doesn't necessarily mean that person did not commit suicide. So it's some of the things, like I said, some of the things that kind of seem, there's no way this person didn't commit suicide. That isn't all the time true. On the other hand, when we look at staged crime scenes, particularly individuals who stage suicides, some of the things that we find are there's a history of domestic violence in that relationship. There have been threats to kill that person in the past. Sometimes what we see are suspicious behaviors after the fact. One of the things that we saw earlier is that Scott Purk moved in with another woman pretty shortly after Meg died. I'm often amazed sometimes when I see these staged suicides is how much the perpetrator will take all this care to create this scene that looks like suicide. And yet after the fact, it's almost like they think nobody's paying attention, and they'll do all these things like go on a wild spending spree and move in with the girlfriend or the boyfriend and not talk to their in-laws anymore, do all this kind of suspicious behavior that really points the finger at them. This is an interesting case. I think it has a lot of twists and turns. It's certainly a tragic case in the sense that a young woman who had all this potential and was going to be a mom never got the chance to do that. So that's it for today. I'm going to put a little video up that just answers a few questions about my book. Since it's called 101 Questions That True Crime Fans Ask, I will give you some hints as to what some of those questions are. So look for that coming. I'd love for you to subscribe if you like this channel. I'm always open to show suggestions. Take care, be safe. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned next time when we unmask another murderer.